sing at these places. And but it's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been really enjoying learning the guitar, and I'm working on more and more complicated stuff now. I'm doing this one guitar website where they rank the difficulty of the songs you can learn on 1 to 10 scale, and everything like 8 and above is a red, like the red color, which signifies like you're gonna die trying to learn this song. And I've just about finished working on an 8, which is actually the intro to the Heart song "Crazy on You." It's really fast and intricate and technical. And I've just been really enjoying that. It's like a very different head for me than the head where I'm writing books and talking about all this cosmic stuff. And
it's a good outlook.
Yeah, it is. And I only picked up the guitar like 2.5 years ago. I did minor in jazz in college, but it was all percussion. So I can do a really amazing jazz drum solo, but I really missed the fact that I never had a melodic instrument.
Well, I know when you were doing Beyond Belief with me, you you came out dancing Gangnam Style.
That's right, I did.
I remember you brought the audience to its
and then
knees.
You had me dance that way in front of the Conscious Life Expo.
Well, you're good.
The Village Idiot. Thanks a lot, George.
You jump up and do it. So
that's true. I follow my orders, right? Just like they said in Nuremberg.
You do it well. Look, the Source Field Investigations, one of your books, it was a bestseller. I think you've got another one with the Synchronicity Key here. This is something, David, that really strikes home for everybody. All of us are in this mode. As you know, I say there are no coincidences. I think things are done by synchronicity and fate. Give me your overview of this work, the Synchronicity Key.
It's an interesting phenomenon. I don't even really know where to start. You know, I have a friend who's a guy in the music industry that wrote some hit songs for Madonna and Michael Jackson and stuff.
Yeah.
And he's a really switched on guy, and he's telling me that these people that he knows in the music industry are starting to see numbers on clocks all the time. And they don't know what the hell is going on.
Just like we have for years.
Yeah. And they're like, what is this? What is this 11:11? And actually, as I said that, it was just 11:11 Pacific time here, so I was reminded of that. But, you know, it started for me, I guess, really it didn't start until I quit doing all marijuana and alcohol, which was in September 1992. I'm actually coming up on my 21-year sobriety anniversary.
Good for you. Were you doing too much of both?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was maintenance high. I basically just stayed intoxicated, and there was a lot of pain that I was trying to run away from. And when you go through a process of, 12-step groups, you basically, the steps are all about how do you face the thing that you're hiding from with the addiction. And, once I got clean and you go through about 3 months where you just feel horrible because you have no serotonin.
Oh, no, and the withdrawals and everything else.
Oh, yeah. But then after that, and even before that, really, I mean, I started to record my dreams every morning, which my mother had been doing ever since I was a little kid. She had all these dream notebooks, so she was the inspiration for that. And the dreams were becoming very fascinating. They were giving me all kinds of interesting insights. This is kind of unflattering, but I guess I'll share it with 20 million of my closest friends.
Yeah.
There was a girl who took a strong interest in me. She was 24 years old, and I found out over the course of time that she was married to a 54-year-old man, and she wanted to have an affair with me.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, gosh, 19.
Wow. So she's the cougar.
Yeah, and she goes,
she also
David, you have the most beautiful eyes I have ever seen on a man. I was like, wow, thank you. That's really amazing. And we were... And
compliments go far with you.
They do.
Yep.
They do, especially back then because I had low self-esteem. I was coming off of a massive drug addiction. We had this gym class. I'm probably giving too much information now, but we had this gym class where I'm hacking up all these lung cookies, as I used to call them, when you cough up resin out of your lungs. Because once I stopped smoking, all the stuff started to clear. It just
breaks down, exactly.
And then she starts to want to, have this extramarital affair with me. And I kind of thought maybe we were going to do it, but it really was against my moral and ethical principles, and I didn't want this guy to come after me.
So you're fighting yourself at that time.
Yeah, and then I have this dream in which she's attacking me with a dagger.
Oh, boy.
And the only defense that I had was to take my shirt off and to try to trap the dagger as she's trying to stab at me with it.
So you got it wrapped around your arm or something?
Yeah, and then I'm also holding it sort of like between both hands, and I'm trying to like wrap the arm, you know.
Yeah.
And she's just laughing the whole time and acting like it's not a big deal, but at the same time she's being extremely savage. And then, interestingly enough, after this dream, and it was very eye-opening, I was like, wow, what the heck is this all about? Then we actually went to a Chinese restaurant together, and we go into the Chinese restaurant, and I worked for 2 years with people who have developmental disabilities, and I love them. I mean, I actually really enjoyed that work, even though I did change adult diapers and things like that, and I worked with people who had severe behavioral problems.
It's a lot of work and a great commitment on your part.
Yeah, and they gave us 2 cents over minimum wage. It was $5.77 an hour, and that was supposed to make you feel good that you're getting more than the minimum. But anyway, we went to this Chinese restaurant for our, I guess, a date, you could call it, and they brought in a busload of about 25 developmentally disabled people to have their group dinner. And so all these people were like staring at her and smoking cigarettes and drinking soda, and the whole thing just got really, really bizarre. And I just kept feeling like something's not right about this. You know, this is a sign. This is not a random event that these people all came into the restaurant when I already had this crazy dream.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went back to my room, and she starts trying to make out with me, and I just told her, look, I'm just not comfortable. I'm really sorry. This just doesn't feel right. And then I had dreams telling me, no, you made the right decision.
How'd you get rid of her?
Well, I mean, basically, if you got a woman in your room who's that hot and she wants to make out with you and you just say, sorry, I'm not really interested, she's not going to come back.
She just walked away, huh? Well, you're lucky you didn't end up like the Redford did in the movie The Natural.
I haven't seen that one.
Well, you got to get that. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. She turned on him.
Well, no, I was lucky. That's true, because that could happen. She could have become like the woman in the dream.
Yep.
Her character in the dream.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was one of the very early temptations when I was getting sober and my sobriety was still sort of in jeopardy. I could have relapsed, but I stayed clean, and I avoided these sexual temptations that were coming my way, and I basically was able to kind of get my life straightened out. And what started to happen after this was I got the following February, because this was in September, October, where this whole sequence of events was happening with this woman, and I was getting sober. Then in February, that's when a friend of mine told me that UFOs were real, and he heard it from his physics professor, who happened to be the head of the department at a major New York State university, and also worked for NASA throughout the 1970s, and said to my friend in a private 2-hour teacher-student conference they had that UFOs are real. The government has been hiding the truth ever since at least the Roswell crash.
And this is coming from a scientist.
This is coming from the head of the physics department.
Wow.
Who actually told his whole class, leaving everybody slack-jawed, and then my guy happened to be the 8th student in the class and took a teacher-student conference right after it was over and said, basically, okay, what the hell are you talking about? And he got into all this technical detail, and I've gone through it many times. By this point, I'd just come out of the 90 and 90 they tell you to do, 90 meetings in 90 days where you don't use, and you basically go to a AA or NA meeting every day. I didn't do narcotics, but the only two choices you had were Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. And NA started to freak me out after a while because all these guys are in there like saying, hey, man, you ever get that feeling when you're in the doctor's office and you just want to open up a drawer and look for works? And I'm like, no.
Get me out of here, right?
Yeah. And then in AA, I was like, well, I never really had a drinking problem. I just like to get high and smoke grass.
What did you drink when you did drink?
Usually like screwdrivers. I do like vodka and orange juice.
Okay.
And I one time ended up so drunk that my friend kicked me in the head, and I had a little blood, and
and you didn't even know
stuff
it.
would happen. I had vomiting,
Would you drive too?
Oh God, no. No.
Well,
No, I was. That's
one
not
smart thing you did.
Yeah. No, I've always been like almost polite to a fault. Like I will be the guy who not only gives you the shirt off of his back, but I'll go to the store and buy you another shirt. And you can wear that one on top of the dirty one.
Well, do you find it difficult to keep this restraint?
You mean staying clean?
Uh-huh.
I did this event called Lightning in a Bottle. It's like Burning Man, except Burning Man's about 40,000. This was about 17,000 people. There was a lot of grass being smoked there, and it was the best quality stuff that people can buy.
How could you know?
It was very aromatic. And there is a sort of a feeling that I get, but it's like I understand now that my happiness relies on chemicals in my brain that have to be secreted in order for the happiness response to exist. And if I use those drugs, all the drugs are doing is it's like telling my body, okay, I want to use what my supply of happiness is for the week. I want to use it all tonight.
Plus, you do know if you go over the line, it could destroy you.
Oh, yeah. You blow out all your happiness in one shot, and then the whole rest of the week you're depressed. And ultimately what happened to me was I couldn't feel good unless I smoked. And you're right. When I went to the meetings, the thing that shocked me was, the first night I went, it was a synchronicity in of itself, because the night that I went the first time, 2 anniversaries were going on. There was a 5-year and a 13-year. And I'm listening to the stories that these guys are saying and how low they had to sink, because they say, you want to raise the bottom, so your bottom doesn't have to mean that you, ruin your whole life and ruin the people you love. And, the 13-year guy, he, went off on a drinking bender and left his wife and kids at home for 13 or, 7 days or something. And he ended up on the side of the road and puke and piss and, just horrible. And I was listening to these stories going, my God, here I'm worried that, I'm going to fail a class in college. Well, I have all my needs paid for by a meal plan, and I'm living on campus. And these guys are talking about, frickin' brink of death type stuff. So it was a big eye-opener for me, and I'm like, wow. If this is as low as I ever need to go, that I walked into a psychology class and I'm going, why does everybody have a blue piece of paper on their desk and why is it so quiet? And then I realized it's a midterm and I hadn't studied, and that's my bottom. Yeah, that's good enough for me. I don't need it to go any lower than that.
So let's bring this into two things. One, when you wrote the source field investigations, you did mention a little bit about synchronicity. I remember that was in there.
Yeah.
And so there's an obvious tie-in between that and today. What is your definition of synchronicity?
Well, synchronicity was coined by Dr. Carl Jung, who was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud, who I was reading about back in college, and probably was on that very blue paper that I just described. And he defined synchronicity as the similarity between one or more events that shouldn't have any relationship to each other otherwise, but there's some mysterious connection between seemingly disconnected events. So on the surface, I brought this hot girl to the Chinese restaurant, right? On the surface, there's no connection between this busload of 25 developmentally disabled people showing up at the same time that we did. But on another level, I saw it as a very poignant message that, I was acting like these people, and I was being less than fully present, in the same way that the dream was telling me the same thing. So synchronicity, for me, a lot of people keep saying, I get this question all the time, David, what about the numbers? Why do I keep seeing these numbers all the time? And I say, look, the numbers are a symbol from some greater part of you. You could call it your soul, or I like to call it the higher self, and they are awakening you to the fact that we live in a hologram. It's not real in the way that most people think. This Cartesian matter paradigm that we've been living in is only a convenient arrangement. It's like a marriage to some bondage where the marriage doesn't have any of the benefits that marriage should have, and all you're doing is getting nagged by matter all the time. You're not having anything fun. It's just a miserable existence. That's the existence that most people are living in, where they think that they're born and they die, and when you die, that's it. You're done.
A lot of people think that.
I know. And I even when I was in the throes of my addiction, I never felt that way. I've had
my doubts.
Well, I know, and we've gone through this before, but I noticed in the beginning of the show that you had an audio clip of yourself talking to a caller in which you articulated very clearly the same thing that I feel. And I think you and I have started to see more and more of the same way as time goes on here.
Maybe we've evolved. Maybe we're just getting old, David, huh?
It could be. I got over the hill on March 8th of this year. I'm 40 now. So.
Oh, old man, you.
What can I say?
I'll buy 10 years from you. You and I will negotiate a price.
I'm still fighting, and so are you. So.
Well, that's the name of the game. You have to. So synchronicity, what causes it? I mean, it's there. We know it's there. How does it work?
Well, the only rational conclusion that you can make as these events intrude on your reality, sooner or later, you have to start seeing, okay, there's some part of me that's intelligent, that's got this whole thing figured out a lot more than I do, and it's out there going around and setting up things to happen and making somebody drop the banana peel that I end up slipping on or whatever, you know. There's weird subconscious coordination between people, and in some cases with inanimate objects, including somebody wrote in the other day and said, I'm realizing that something as seemingly insignificant as biting down wrong on a seed and getting the seed stuck between my teeth, and that painful event happens right as I'm having this thought that I realize is a very bad idea for me to be going into. That seed was not an accident. My body was manipulated by some other part of me to make me bite down the wrong way.
See, but I wonder, David, if we generate the events or if this force that's out there that creates this synchronicity generates it.
That's a good question, and I believe the answer is that there is a greater force involved, and I believe that on one level the force is ourselves and our own soul. On another level, there's a collaboration with other people's souls, and we're all talking to each other on some other plane of existence. Then I think there's also higher beings that are not incarnate on Earth that are helping coordinate it, and those beings in turn are coordinating the intelligent directives of living planets, stars, and in fact the galaxy itself, because in my model it's a living universe.
A living universe.
It's a living, thinking universe. The universe is made of stuff that thinks.
Is it a God-driven universe?
A lot of people call it God. You know, that's a sort of a gender-specific term that has a lot of emotional charge for some people, but we can go with the word God. I mean, it's totally appropriate.
You've been doing this for a long, long time. Are you getting answers?
Absolutely. I have a dream practice, and I'm celebrating 21 years of sobriety and getting my dreams every morning, as I said, on September 22nd. And I can't tell you how many times I've had incredibly accurate dreams of future events before they happen. It's happened so many times that anybody who is a skeptic, you just have to have compassion for them because they haven't had the experience. But what synchronicity does is it frickin' kicks the door down.
Hold on, David. We're going to hit the break and come right back for more on Coast to Coast AM. Same great television show, brand new website name. It's www.beyondbelief.com. Simple as that. Remember that and take advantage of it. You get 10 days free. This Friday night, our special guest will be Dr. Robin Falkov talking about alternative medicine and what they're trying to do to you. BeyondBelief.com. And welcome back. David Wilcock with us. We're talking about his latest work, The Synchronicity Key. Synchronicity. We're going to get into your calls in the last hour, and I'm sure most of you have had some events that you would call synchronicity. David, as we're talking about this so-called God function in the universe, are you saying that synchronicity is determined, or do we create it?
Well, I don't know if I can answer that.
You can answer anything.
I mean, I'd say it's both, really. You know, it could be either one. There are some things that are determined, and there are some things that we do appear to create. There is one level in which synchronicity is very interactive, and if I have a thought that's a progressive thought, I may get a ringing in my right ear, and that's a synchronicity that tells me that I'm on the right track. or I may get this sudden rushing sensation in my heart. Those would be like somatic synchronicities or body synchronicities. Similarly, if I'm having a negative thought, I might get like a stabbing pain or feeling like there's a little needle pricking me somewhere. And these things have been happening for a long time. So synchronicity dynamically interacts with your thoughts as you're having them, but that only covers one half of my book, and the second half, which is more academic, and we need that for the skeptics out there who are going to do whatever they can do to rip this apart.
Yeah, it's like you had two different hats on.
Yeah, the second half basically is showing that there's dozens and dozens of cases throughout all recorded history, all the way back to the Sumerians, and it's every chronological record of history that we have, showing that it's the same story, the same sequence of events that Joseph Campbell called archetypes, and they keep on happening. And the thing that's so amazing is how precisely they keep repeating. If I may, let me give you one example and how it relates to something that's very personal for everybody, which would be 9/11. 9/11, as it turns out, fit the logic of these cycles that I had learned about in 1999. I had been given a manuscript written by this French scholar, Francois Masson, and he was working off of this other guy, Michel Helmer, who discovered that history is repeating itself in cycles of time that are all harmonics, meaning they're all divisible into this grand number that all the ancient mystery schools and religious teachings were obsessed with, which is this unit of 25,920 years that apparently is nothing more than a wobble in the Earth's axis. But now it appears, according to Walter Cruttenden and others who support him, that it's actually our solar system is orbiting another star, and we're actually in a binary solar system.
A lot of people believe that. A lot of people believe
that. The Sumerians called it Nibiru, and I'm sure you've had dozens and dozens of people talking about Nibiru on this show. I didn't want to buy into the Nibiru thing for a long time, and that actually caused me to resist this idea of a binary solar system for many years. But Cruttenden just hammered it down with academic scholarship. I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, we figured out that the Earth isn't flat. We figured out that the Earth is not the center of the solar system. But we still haven't figured out that we got another gravitating body right near us that's affecting the gravitational pull of the Earth, and it's making this cycle occur. But once you understand the geometry that stars create, and that we're moving through a geometric energy field, and that geometry actually, it's almost like a CD, and as you rotate the CD, it plays a song. Except in this case, we're being played by the song. And the thoughts that we have and the decisions that we make are very precisely guided. But nothing could have prepared me for the scholarship that would be required to try to advance Masson's work. Now, I inherited this manuscript from a good friend of mine, and it had some really impressive stuff. This Frenchman, Michel Helmer, in like 1961, predicted that in the year 1968 that there would be a massive revolution in France, and he was able to get it down within just a few days of when it happened. And the reason why he knew it was going to happen was that he had identified that French history was repeating itself precisely in a cycle that he had found that shows up all over the place that's exactly 1/4 of an age of the zodiac. Now, the age of the zodiac is one of the core mysteries. He showed that Roman history and American history keep doing the same things over an age of the zodiac. So, you know, I heard about, obviously, that we're in the age of Pisces. We've just moved into the age of Aquarius. But everybody kind of laughs at that, and they say, oh, these cycles, they don't mean anything. You know,
a lot of people say that.
Age of the zodiac, that's nothing. Well, it turns out that the knowledge to understand that time is a fractal and that time is cyclical rather than linear was encoded in over 30 ancient cultures around the world. They were given this knowledge apparently by gods, as they called them, these human extraterrestrials who visited them. And these gods could have told them anything they wanted, but this is the one thing they kept saying, is the most important thing you need to know. Learn about the cycles. Because what we find out is that history is like the movie Groundhog Day, and it's the same darn story over and over again, and the story includes some pretty nasty stuff. It includes violence, war, atrocities, and it is repeating, and it repeats so precisely that, as I said, in 1961, Michel Helmer, this scholar, an astrologer, was able to predict that the whole thing that Joan of Arc pulled off in the 1400s was going to repeat as a student-led revolution in France, and it actually did repeat down to within about 4 days or less of when the key battle happened that Joan of Arc ultimately was martyred for participating in. But remember...
Would you call that synchronicity, though, or a prophecy?
Well, it's synchronicity to me, because what happened is that after I learned about this, I immediately got all curious about 9/11. And I said, okay, if this guy is right, if history can repeat itself so precisely that you're only a few days off over this 539-year gap, that Jesus refers to it in the Bible by saying you must forgive your brother 7 times, 77 times. Well, 7 times 77 is 539, which is the cycle that he says this is all happening with. It's almost exactly 540, 1 year off, and 540 is exactly 1/4 of an age of the zodiac at 2001 or 60 years.
Interesting.
So your listeners can go back and, listen to that part. If I'm talking too fast, I do apologize. But the point is that there was a basic cycle that the book gave. I looked at 9/11, and I said, if this guy is right, let's take 9/11 and rewind it 539 years in the past. See what happens. Sure enough, 539 years before September 11th, 2001, we get September 11th, 1462, I believe, and September 16th, it's September 17th, 1462, so it's only 6 days off. The biggest war that had happened in Europe for quite some time took place. It was called the Battle of Soissino. Now, that in and of itself doesn't really mean anything. It could be looked at as just
a coincidence,
alchemy, right? Like, he's got the tinfoil hat on real tight. But the thing is, when I investigated it more, I found, much to my amazement, that much of modern history regarding the exact time that George H.W. Bush lost the election to Clinton happened within days of when this thing called the 13 Years' War started. Clinton actually appears to be a reiteration of a political figure that was leading an alliance back then. His name was Johannes von Besen. And one of the weirdest things about this science is that the same people come back, and they look just like the people they were before, and they do the same stuff.
You mean reincarnated type people?
Yes. And probably the weirdest one on that front, which we can jump around a little bit, is there's a fractal between Roman history and American history across 2,160 years, or one age of the zodiac, and it's astonishing. It's like every single thing that happens in Roman history becomes American history. So Rome has the First Punic War, we have World War I. Rome has the Second Punic War, we have World War II. Rome's biggest enemy in both of the Punic Wars was Carthage, and Carthage's cycle companion is Germany. Germany was America's biggest nemesis in World War I and II.
And, of course, Rome collapses. Look what's happening to us now.
Well, but get a load of this. Hannibal was the Carthaginian general, the general of the army for Carthage, that went against Rome in the Second Punic War. Hannibal is the spitting image of Hitler. They look almost identical, except Hitler is like Hannibal shaving his beard and only leaving a little bit under his nose. It's the same guy. And they spent 6 years at war. They both marched through the Alps. Hannibal used elephants. Hitler used tanks. They had the same war strategy. They looked the same. They talked the same.
What are you saying, David? That history does repeat itself?
I'm saying that reality is not real. We're in a hologram. There is a story that is repeating, and it will keep repeating until we master the lesson it's teaching us. And synchronicity is intruding into our lives on a personal level to nudge us to what the lesson is, but it can't come right out and tell you because that violates a universal law, which is called the law of free will.
Now, these events of synchronicity, do they happen every 539 years or every event but 539 years from that event? So we might have 20 events over the next 10 years, but you can go back 539 years from each one.
Very good question. There's a few cycles that we have to look at, but the two strongest ones appear to be the 2,160-year Age of the Zodiac and then the 539-year Age of the Zodiac quarter cycle. And again, you shave off 1 year because then it becomes more harmonic. You can divide 7 into it and 11 and all these other numbers.
Right.
But the fact is it works. And the interesting answer to your question in terms of what's going on is that there are overlaps. It's not like only one cycle is at work. You might have a 539-year cycle, and you might have a 2,160-year cycle that collide. And they don't always collide symmetrically. Another cycle is if you take the Age of the Zodiac and you divide it up like a triangle into 3 equal pieces, you get a 720-year cycle. And the history of Christianity very neatly divides into this. If you take 720 years after the birth of Christ, you have an event called the Iconoclasm, which is when suddenly the people demanded that images of Jesus be taken off of their money and off of the archways over the entrance to a town and off of posters on the wall.
Why?
Because they didn't like the fact that the government was using Christianity to create a government-sanctioned religion and a military crackdown in the name of God. And the iconoclasm was when the government severely tightened its grip and used religion to cause this to happen. Then you go 720 years again forward in the future, very precisely. And within 1 year, you have the beginning of the Renaissance and the Reformation that collapsed the church and state union and separated church and state. And it collapsed the stricture over the Bible, where you couldn't read the Bible. You could only have it read to you in a liturgy at church. And it also led to the development of science, which up until that point had been literally kept under martial law by the government, which was the church. The church would not allow you to develop scientifically, and that all broke down on this 720-year cycle. And interestingly enough, just on that point quickly, there is a totally independent Russian researcher named Anatoly Fomenko who's working off of another Russian researcher named Morozov. Morozov came out with this same discovery about cycles of history back in the early 20th century, but he thought that it meant that history was faked by the chronologies and that the people writing up the histories were just basically running out of ideas, and they kept using the same script over and over again because they wanted to fill up pages or something. I mean, I never really felt like that theory made sense, but this guy Fomenko, he's a hardcore scholar, and as I reveal in the book, Synchronicity Key, Gary Kasparov, who was one of the...
Great chess player.
Yeah, the number one chess guy, right? Gary Kasparov is totally into these cycles of history. He says there is something here that is very profound and requires our attention because all of written history is doing this. And what I show is that the biggest cycles that Fomenko found, there's a series of 4 of them, and it's in a big graph towards the end of the book. And all 4 of these cycles are almost or exactly 720 years apart from each other. So the 720-year cycle that these French guys talked about, which is exactly 1/3 the Age of the Zodiac, was independently discovered by a totally separate guy who had no idea that it was connected to ancient mystery teachings or cycles of history that were predicted by the gods or any of that stuff. He thinks that it's all people that were messing around with the history books because they were bored and they wanted to fill up pages or something.
Well, let's assume that's all correct, David. And we have these kinds of cycles with events occurring, similar events. Again, though, is it Is it us? Are we the ones developing this? Or is there some other force doing this to us?
Well, okay, it's an interesting question.
Or is that I don't know answer?
Well, the question in and of itself is based in Cartesian logic, which says that there is an I and a them. And the new science says there's only identity. The whole universe is awareness.
It's all one.
That's all you get is one consciousness, and it's bifurcated itself so many times that we have this illusion of a personality and a separate identity, and that's what we're meant to have to grow from. Like the Arthurian Grail legend. King Arthur, when he finds the Holy Grail and he's able to pull the sword out of the stone, that represents that he's the master of both worlds. And what he finds out is that as the king, he is the master of the forest. The health of his psyche is the health of the land, and he is an embodiment of the land and vice versa. And that's what an effective leader has to realize. And apparently Jesus, came to the same thing. Great master teachers, they break down that wall of identity. And most of us, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it in cosmic terms, we are not yet at that point where we realize that we are, in fact, just one point of a greater awareness. And so we're therefore living in amnesia.
But the way I take it from you, if I'm reading you right, is that we're the ones creating this.
Yeah, you just got to be really expansive in how you define we.
That's right. Everything, I guess.
Because ultimately what we show in the book is that the path of Jesus is an embodiment of the galactic mind. When the Bible says God the Father and God the Son, that actually means the universe as an intelligent creator and the galaxy as an intelligent creator. The galaxy has a mind, it has a personality. There's science that proves that, where, when you're in alignment with the center of the galaxy on Earth, your psychic ability goes up by 430%. That happens once a day at 13 hours and 30 minutes local sidereal time. So galactic alignment directly affects your consciousness because the galaxy is you. And so Jesus apparently figured that out, and he said this very interesting statement. He goes, somebody asks him, and I think it's in Matthew, they say, how many times should I forgive my brother if I've sinned against him? And Jesus says, forgive him 7 times, 77 times. Now, why in the heck would he say that? Well, it also says that he only speaks in parables. He never comes out with anything direct. It's always encrypted. And if you break the encryption, he's talking about this 539-year cycle, I believe. And what's so fascinating is that the end of the cycle is here, and the nemesis, the planetary global nemesis, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call them, will be defeated as we go through this.
Hold on, David. We're coming back. Can't believe we've already gone through an hour already. More coming on Coast to Coast AM. Well, he's called one of the greatest thinkers of our time. David Wilcock with us as we talk about his latest work, The Synchronicity Key. Well, I guess, David, you don't get many arguments about this because synchronicity is all around us, isn't it?
Absolutely. People are having this happen more and more, and it's basically like something that just wears you down to the point where whatever social stigma is associated with believing in quote-unquote woo-woo stuff melts away because it's a kinder, gentler, and more enjoyable universe if there is an interactive process going on between you and the cosmos. It breaks down this idea that we're all alone and that there's nobody out there looking out for us. There's no higher power. There's no greater plan to the cosmos. And I have found that I'm much more inspired and much more motivated in my life as a result of having had so many hundreds of incredible synchronicity experiences over the years.
Which is the one that you will always remember?
Well, there are many that were very poignant, but in some ways, the ones that happened to me when I was still first getting started and I really was kind of new to this have a very strong place in my heart. And there's one that I talk about in the book that probably was the number one in the early years. I had gotten sober. I came back from college after the first semester where I'd just gotten clean only a few months ago, and then I saw my old drug buddies, and they were still active, as it's called in the program.
Doing their
they're
thing.
still using, right? And they tell you in the meetings, oh, people, places, and things. You don't want to be around the people, the places, or the things that you knew before. And I said, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me. These are my friends. What could happen? You can almost hear the storm clouds rolling in at this point, right? So I go over there and I start telling them, well, yeah, I got sober as a result of all these crazy, weird coincidences that have been happening to me. And, I've been talking to you guys about stuff like this all these years. And I've been writing my dreams down every morning, and they've been amazing. I've already had all these strange future prophecies come true. And I just gave them this big monologue, basically. And I'm the only one talking. And I just went on and on and on. And I've since learned you got to rein that stuff in. Only give people 10% of what you think you want to tell them, and then stop and wait, see what they say. But I did this huge monologue, and then when I got done, my friends just cut me down. They just said, you're going to die old, fat, and alone in a nursing home, drooling on your bib while the workers are just hungering for their next cigarette break and couldn't give a darn about you. I was like, wow, dude, And I finally got so upset by this that I said, look, I can't listen to this anymore. If you guys don't stop with this withering assault, I'm going to have to leave. And they just kept going and going and going. And I actually got up and walked out of the house, which for me, as a person who's non-confrontational, was very unusual. And I walked between their street and my street, and I'm standing there at the crossroads, and for some reason, I put my arms out to the sides in a classic sort of like religious pose, I guess, and I looked up at the sky, and I said, you, whoever you are out there, I know you exist. I know that I'm not alone. I know that you've been guiding me, that these synchronicities are real, that these dreams you're telling me are for a reason. I believe you, and I trust you, and I know you're out there.
Whoever you are.
Right. And as I said that in my mind, the exact area of the sky that I was looking at had a huge shooting star go by. A brilliant streak of light shot across the sky. And I felt this incredible surge of energy come up through my body from my feet up through the top of my head that was so intense that it felt like I literally turned a somersault in the air above my body. And I just completely lost it and burst into tears of ecstasy. And just the feeling of like looking at the sky, saying all this very meaningful stuff, and having that shooting star right at that moment, at the exact moment that I reached the conclusion of what I wanted to say. And there's been a number of events like this, and in the book I go through about 5 of them that are that heavy.
They just don't stop, do they?
They don't stop. It's like all the time. And I keep getting email from people describing events like this that are happening in their own lives that are just phenomenal. And there is a reason for this. You're not crazy. You're not having some experience that gets you locked up in a mental hospital. This is all happening for a reason. And unfortunately, for most people it's unfortunate, that there have been planetary controllers who are manipulating us so that we think this way. And they are very pointedly steering the narrative away from any discussion that could lead to there being a higher power. They have very successfully manipulated our media and our environment, not you, George, but I'm talking about regular mainstream media. They've manipulated the media to say that if you are scientific, if you are smart, and if you have any real credibility, you don't believe in any of this stuff. And only people who believe in this stuff they smell bad and they don't shave. And, that's the prevailing paradigm. That's how they've steered the narrative. But here's the deal. All these people who are skeptics, secretly, they very much want to believe, but they also don't want to be ridiculed. And the fear of ridicule, the fear of having your ego torn down by others, the fear of that public humiliation is so often what keeps people stuck to the skepticism. The typical skeptic, and we all encounter them, especially in this field that you talk about on the air, George. The typical skeptic is a person who has built an identity around being intelligent.
I want to talk about skeptics, David, with you and karma when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. Back with David Wilcock. David, let's talk a little bit more about skepticism, which I think is healthy.
Yeah.
Where'd you go? David? Oh, we're going to have to call him back, Gina. David has joined the ranks of the dearly departed. Let's hope he hasn't departed that much. David Wilcock with us, of course. We're talking about his work, The Synchronicity Key. And he is. He's called one of the greatest thinkers of all time. He really understands where he's going, what he's doing, and he's also got his own television show going with Gaiam TV as well. You got him? Here we go. Where'd you go?
Sorry about that. I was trying to juggle a cordless phone and a corded phone.
You dropped it, didn't you?
And I dropped the phone.
That's it.
Maybe it was a synchronicity.
Anyways, we were talking about skepticism, and I think it's healthy. What do you think?
I like skepticism. I don't want people to take my word for it. That's the point. This book has got nearly 700 references in it. It's not fluff. But the thing is that what we needed, in my opinion, and I know you've backed me on this, George, for a long time, we need scientific verification so that the skeptics are actually satisfied if they're open-minded enough to actually hear what we have to say.
True.
And I know that I did your show, Beyond Belief, and we did a whole episode that, was amazing in all the stuff that we went through. And, when you start hearing all the evidence laid out, skepticism has a way of just melting away, because if you do your homework, you could spend years and years and years and just have one eye-popping epiphany after another and never get tired of all the new stuff there is to learn, and how amazing it is that so many people are not aware of this yet. It's like you become part of an insider group. You're part of some movement that's happening that's breaking down the barriers of what it means to be human and what it means to be alive and conscious. And I love it. I'm totally excited about the opportunity to have, in a field that is so saturated with content and a lot of people that always say the same thing, that I have been able to actually come up with a discovery that, in my view, this is as big as like Copernicus realizing the sun is the center of the solar system. Because what we're seeing is, okay, not only is time patterned and cyclical, but we can use those cycles to make predictions about things that haven't actually happened yet. And it happens that we're at the end of the whole big cycle of 25,000 years. And what it predicts in over 30 different ancient cultures. So, I've harped on the Bible a lot here, but this is not a strictly Christian prophecy. It's over 30 ancient cultures that all said we're going to go into a golden age, and they gave very specific mathematical codes about these cycles, and we go through that in the book. So the point is, we have a global nemesis. Now, skeptics, to some degree, have been influenced by this force that tries to take anybody who looks at the very real corruption in our world and marginalizes them. And so there was a fascinating scientific study that just came out the other day, and I love to quote references, but I don't remember who it was because I just read it and I haven't written about it yet. So I will just have to say there was a study right for now, but I'll have it in an article coming up. And a group of scientists recently researched why people laugh. And it's amazing that it's been so long before somebody really got into that. And what they ultimately concluded was that, similar to things like hunger or thirst or sexual arousal or being tired and wanting to go to sleep, that our biology has given us a basic mechanism that wants to look for errors and mistakes in our environment and tickles our brain when we find a mistake or an error in our environment. And that's the basis of all humor. That's why we laugh. After all this scientific research they did, that's the conclusion they came to. And I think they're right. John Cleese from the Monty Python Flying Circus said that humor is about embarrassment, and you're embarrassed when things don't go the way they should for you because there's an error or a mistake in your environment. So I think that a lot of times what skeptics are doing is they are so conditioned to believe that anybody who talks about the stuff that's on your show or anybody who's out there listening to your show, those people are an error and a mistake in the environment. And these skeptics are so much that they get such a serotonin rush, such a high off of being right and making other people wrong that it is like an addiction. And then they start trolling and they start writing all these hateful comments in discussion forums. And every time they do that, they're getting high. And they're actually getting high off of denigrating people. But I make a very interesting, there's a whole chapter in the book where I talk about the scientific proof of energy vampires and the idea that we actually all have a certain degree of vital energy and that other people can, in fact, absorb your vital energy by denigrating you, humiliating you, shaming you, and creating a negative emotional state in you. And I actually spell out with a great deal of scientific evidence that this actually works and that people can get totally addicted to that rush that they get because there is an energy transfer. They actually do absorb your energy. And on a microbiological level, we see it happening in laboratory experiments. My favorite one is Wilcock, where he takes fish eggs and he puts older eggs next to younger eggs, and the older eggs actually suck the life force out of the younger eggs and kill them off. And they're separated hermetically. Now, the only thing they have is optical contact. But if you shield the ultraviolet light from passing between the two rooms, then it doesn't work anymore. So in very specific terms, I talk about the idea that DNA is an emanation from quantum physics, that quantum physics itself is wired for life, and there's plenty of really good scientific points that show that, and we've talked about them on your show plenty of times, and that DNA ultimately is storing photons. A typical DNA molecule has about 1,000 photons zinging back and forth inside of it like a fiber optic cable, and other people can pull those photons out of your body. And when they do, even though it's kind of a bad way to get energy, they will feel more inspired, more alive. They might feel physically stronger. They might feel satisfied in a way that they wouldn't before.
And they may not even know why.
That's true. And we are constantly having these energetic handshakes with other people every time we think about somebody. Here's a weird thing. If you're a celebrity, and both you and I are to some degree, George, though certainly not to the degree of like people in the movies or whatever, but right. We're public figures. And when a lot of people focus on your photograph, an image of your face, they are actually sending you energy and stimulating your nervous system. And this was proven in which scientific experiments done by Dr. William Broad, where you sit two people in two adjacent rooms, or they could even be far apart, and one person is wired up to measure their electrical activity on their skin. You got another person who's watching them on a closed-circuit television. And you instruct the person to stare intensely at this other participant on the closed-circuit TV that's a hidden camera. They don't know it's there. During the time they're being stared at, and only the time that they're being stared at, about 59% of the time their immune system had a huge response. Now, 59% is way above chance, which would be 50. It's actually 18% higher. So that's very anomalous, and there's a bunch of studies like that have been done. So we do have hardcore scientific evidence that we are interconnected by consciousness. In fact, just living next door to another person, you will actually, it's been proven by the Institute of Heart Math, you will synchronize your breathing rate, you'll synchronize your heart rate, and you'll actually have similar brainwave activity. And the coolest part is that the person who has the most coherent bodily activity, meaning the person whose brainwaves are the most sort of, you could say, high energy, that will win out over the lower energy. So the positive attitude and all that stuff actually does have a distinctly impressive effect on the environment around us. And the number one way to show that is the meditation effect. You get 7,000 people together in one room, they meditate, And scientific studies that were published in the Journal of Offender Rehabilitation, there's about 50 of them, of different levels of size of groups. But what they showed collectively is, in many cases, the 7,000 people groups were able to reduce terrorism worldwide by 72%. And similar reductions would also occur in crime and in violent death, and there'd be improvements in the economy. So we can, in fact, influence our environment by how we think and how we behave. And that leads back to your earlier question, which is, are we doing this or are the cycles doing this? And I believe the meditation effect shows that we can change the timeline that we're on.
I think so, too.
The universe is adaptive and malleable. It's not like we're stuck on this thing where it says, oh, you know, you guys are on that part where you're going to have another world war. A lot of people are going to have to die. Sorry. It's not the way it is. We're actually, you mentioned karma, and karma is really the key here.
I want to spend some time after the break, too, David, to talk about karma, because you know the old saying, what goes around comes around.
That's right.
I believe that, don't you?
Absolutely. It's scientifically provable.
The big question is, again, why?
I think ultimately because we're all the same identity, and what we do to others we're doing to ourselves. And there's a level of our being where we absolutely know that, and we will enforce it even to the point of destroying a physical body of our own incarnation if that's what we need to do to get the lesson. It can be heavy. The universe, you know, the universe is not playing around. The universe wants you to be loving. And if you're not loving, it will smash out whatever is not love. And that's what we see in these cycles. You know, the universe is giving us a class, and the class can be intense because we have more than one life to live. If you lose one body, you'll reincarnate and have another one. I have a whole chapter in the book on Jesus teaching reincarnation, tracing that lineage. So these things are real, and reincarnation is a commonality throughout almost all of the ancient spiritual teachings in the world.
Let's get into karma, big time, when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. What is, David, the law of karma? Okay.
The law of karma is essentially what you said before the break. What goes around comes around.
Okay.
And some people call it's a variant of the golden rule, I guess, except that instead of as you do unto others, so would you have them do unto you, it's like whatever you do to others is going to be done to you. And this is one of those things in which it's a nebulous spiritual concept right now. Some people believe it, and a lot of people don't. And if we had a more widespread public discussion about the reality that karma may exist, I think there would be a lot less crime, because what we have now is a very robust body of scholarship that I go through in the book. There's a few chapters just on reincarnation. The idea that some of the things that we do to others are too intense for us to experience those same things within one lifetime, and we will actually use reincarnation. And in the afterlife, there's a series of about 10 different experiences that we all go through that was charted out by Dr. Michael Newton. And I take my readers through all 10 of those things in great detail. And what he showed was that everybody has the same experiences when they die. Everybody goes through the same stuff, and he did this by regressive hypnosis.
Okay. Yeah.
And bringing people, even atheists, they all go through these same basic 10 stages. And what happens is when you're in the afterlife, you now are aware that your life on earth had a purpose and that you were trying to accomplish a specific level of spiritual understanding, that your whole reason for being was spiritual, that you were here to learn love and forgiveness. And any time that you haven't done that, you yourself have to plan out the next lifetime and work in, when you're ready for it, repeating the events that you created for others. And that would include torturing somebody, murdering somebody, all that kind of stuff. If you've tortured somebody, you're going to have to be tortured. If you murder somebody, you're going to have to be murdered. And apparently, in the afterlife, we all know this, and we know that we're bound to it, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, there's no question that your deeds and actions come back. They come back either to help you or haunt you.
But think about this, George. If the power structure here on Earth believes that they are a force of nature much like a wildfire, and that a force of nature is not beholden to karma, and they realize that if karma was real, that they would be in really big trouble, they might be steering the narrative so that we don't ever talk about karma with any seriousness at all. There is no public consensus. Nobody is talking about it and saying, this karma thing seems to be real, and maybe we ought to look at quantum physics and relativity and discoveries of modern science that may help shed light on why this seems to be happening and what can we learn from it.
At what point, though, these power brokers, does karma bite them?
It happens again and again. You look in history and you see spectacular defeats. And in fact, in the book, I show that there was a cycle relationship between the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution. And the author of the book, who wrote it in 1980, predicted in 1980 that the Soviet Union would collapse in 1991 based on nothing but cycle science. And in that same relationship between France and Russia, he was able to identify that there was a major, if you will, Illuminati-type villain named Robespierre. And this guy created something called the Reign of Terror. It was government-sponsored terrorism against its own people. They starved the people. They bankrupted their economy. They cut off all the supply lines, so people had no food and no money, and they're starving to death. And then, because people were rioting from starving to death, they instituted terrorism as an official government policy to clamp down on dissent. What happened is, only about a month after this guy, Robespierre, stages a public event, the first time people had seen him, where he himself walked down the mount like Moses with the Ten Commandments on stone tablets, and he had these fake stone tablets that he was carrying. And he was trying to get people to join this new religion he was creating called the Cult of the Supreme Being. And it was a total Illuminati-type religion, in which he's saying terrorism is just, and it's the only way that the government can appropriately respond to the people. And about a month after he did that, he was put to death in a very gruesome beheading. And I won't go into all the details because it's nasty, but it's in the book. And then the same cycle repeats itself with Stalin, the great Soviet dictator who sent millions of people into concentration camps that were called gulags. Same thing as Hitler. And the timing in the two cycles between the poisoning death of Stalin, I show clear evidence he was poisoned. He did not die naturally. The poisoning of Stalin and the violent death of Robespierre are only less than a week apart in the two cycles. And so the cycles do not treat the nemesis nicely. If you're going to play the villain in this planetary game,
it's going to get you.
You're going to get it.
Maybe that's a good thing.
It is. It's good for everybody because ultimately every soul has to come into perfect balance with your own karmic bank account. You don't get to have a balance that's unpaid.
Do you have to be a believer in karma in order for it to work for you or against you?
As I said, everybody who is hypnotized and goes into the afterlife state, and there are people doing this hypnotic regression. Linda Backman is one of them. She's got a new book coming out pretty soon. I've been reading through it right now, but there are people out there who do this. Leo Sprinkle, classic example of somebody who's done this.
Great guy.
Dr. Michael Newton's been doing it. So when you go into this state of consciousness, doesn't matter if you're a believer or non-believer or indifferent, you will realize that in this level between lifetimes, you totally know there's an agenda of why you're here and what you're trying to learn. And again, the universe so wants you to be a nice person that it will basically stamp down anything that's not nice. And, I myself have admittedly had trouble with how it works because sometimes it seems very intense and over the top. But what apparently it all comes down to is that we are totally accountable for what we do and what we say. And in my life, it appears that I'm trying to balance out all my karma, and I'm just blowing it all out at once. And so anything that I do that's not in alignment, it just flies right up in my face right away. So when I have, like, if I stub my toe, if I cut my finger, any type of negative event that happens to me, and I've had a lot of people laugh at me and ridicule me and think that I'm crazy, but hardly anything that happens to me happens by accident. I know when these things happen, why they happened. I can see clearly the cause and effect between the thoughts that I had or the actions that I took against others and what then happens to me as a result of those thoughts and actions. It's very obvious to me.
Good thinking about this, David. That's why they call you the thinker. Hey, tell me a little bit about your Gaiam TV show.
Well, the Gaiam TV show kind of came about at the same time that I really started to work on this book. It's called Wisdom Teachings, and it's pretty incredible because I'm doing a half an hour a week, and I'm getting on this show, and I'm basically presenting an enormous body of material. Now, I can truthfully say that up until I did Wisdom Teachings, you had to get a $300 ticket and see my all-weekend event in order to get this information. But what's happened is that the economy has changed, and simply put, those big conference ticket sales are not what they used to be. People don't have the money.
They're more splintered
to
now.
go to these conferences anymore. I mean, my conferences, I used to reliably get a good turnout, and this year the turnouts have really not been very good. And I think part of it might be that people really hoped that everything would happen at the end of 2012 that I'd been prognosticating. But I also think in general the economy is like just flattened out. Our favorite hardware store right down the street just closed, and they have a big closing sale. It's like there's just signs of hardship all over the place. And so what I'm doing to kind of meet that is, okay, let me find a way to get this material out to people at a much lower cost that still pays the bills for me so I can afford to do what I do. And yet there's much more content, and it's much less expensive to access. And apparently it's a huge hit. The viewership numbers are terrific, and everybody who's watching it is just totally excited. The only complaint that I get is that people are watching these episodes over and over again, and I'm not making them that way. I'm making it so you can watch them one after the other, and you get a little recap in the next episode of what you heard in the previous one. But
and you're having fun.
Oh, yeah. But, some people are like, they want every episode to be 100% different than the episode before and the episode after.
Sometimes they flow into each other.
Yeah, of course. But I'm going through all of the best stuff that I've collected over all the years of research I've done, entire episodes on the science of DNA that we were talking about, entire episodes on human extraterrestrials that visited us in these ancient cultures, entire episodes on ascension, entire episodes on the Illuminati. I mean, it's just a cosmic encyclopedia loaded with visuals, and the reviews are just totally intense. I mean, people are, like, blown away by this show.
I want you to take a step back here and tell me what you think about end times as it relates to synchronicity.
One other thing, George, if you don't mind, I should probably say that it's wisdomteachings.com is how people access the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Sorry I didn't mention that.
That's okay.
Could you ask the question again,
yes.
please?
Let's talk about synchronicity, and is there any tie-in with end times?
Oh, sure. End times are not relegated strictly to Christian prophecy. Christian prophecy has gotten all tangled up in the book of Revelation, which kind of sounds like some sort of bad acid trip.
Who's laughing in the background?
Well, that's classified.
You are still up to no good, aren't you? I caught you.
Well, what can I say?
That's all I'll say. Go ahead.
I have an audience of admirers. And some are four-legged and some are two-legged.
I'm glad we don't have a video cam in there.
Anyway, the end times are not just a Christian prophecy. It is something that is written through everything from, the prophecies of the Ragnarok that you see in Norse mythology. The Hindu mythology talks about the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age preceding the Golden Age that they call the Satya Yuga. it is just written all over the place that there is a period of great darkness. The Hermetic texts, the Egyptian texts like the Emerald Tablets, talk about a great time of cleansing and purification leading up to this golden age. So it's a worldwide, as I said, over 30 ancient cultures all talk about a coming golden age, but we have to go through a dark period first. Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest sets of records that we have. And in my other book, The Source Field Investigations, which is very much a companion volume for the new one, I think both of them should be read together. Probably I would read Synchronicity Key first as an intro and then read Source Field. That's probably how everybody's going to want to do it from now on once they've read both, and how they'll refer it to others. But anyway, in the Source Field book, I talk about Zoroastrian prophecy, and I specifically mention how old it is. It goes all the way back, apparently, to a group of people that had settled in Siberia before there was a pole shift that actually sank Atlantis and turned it into Antarctica. And that before, the Earth was in a different position, and then when the water came over the island, it actually froze because it became the South Pole. And there was one group that would be Atlantis, and there was another group warring with them that you could call Rama. That's what the Casey readings called it.
Well, how did they sink Atlantis?
According to the intuitive data that we have, and basically there's some scientific data that verifies it, like these radiation fields, it appears that there was an advanced civilization on Earth that had a nuclear war, and the nuclear war destabilized the Earth's axis. And apparently, according to the Casey readings, that was allowed to happen because the Earth at that time was not inhabited by native Earth people. It was inhabited by extraterrestrial humans who had advanced powers like telepathy and telekinesis and were enslaving and manipulating the people indigenous to Earth, using them for sexual gratification, using them as slaves. And so the corruption and the greed was so rampant in Atlantis, apparently, that these higher-level beings allowed for the field to be plowed under, if you will. And the pole shift caused this massive inundation, and I think, according to Casey readings, the people of Atlantis mass reincarnated as the people of America, and Americans are working off the Atlantean karma. And we all have this memory of this horrible catastrophe that ended with big tidal waves and tsunamis. And we feel like that could happen again. I think a lot of people have a deep inner paranoia because of what happened before. I think I got way off track on your question. So.
Well, you got close. The Atlantis thing was interesting.
Well, I mean, help me steer back to what you asked me so I can...
You want me to remember a question I asked 10 minutes ago?
I know. I've given so many data points.
We're talking about end times and...
Zoroastrian, right, of course. So
thank God I write these things down.
You got Antarctica, right, which was Atlantis, and then you got Siberia, which used to be inhabited. When Roswell happened, Stalin said, wait a minute, these guys did not have a frickin' weather balloon. They said it was a disk. So then Stalin goes and digs up old records of an archaeological find of what appeared to be a rocket in the 1800s, and they actually went and they found it, and they dug it up. It had very advanced technology, way ahead of their time, and it had writing on it in Sanskrit. It's called the Russian Roswell or the Siberian Roswell. And I don't know if any of your guests have ever talked about that one. But
yeah, we've had.
Okay.
Had a couple
so
cases.
The point is that the Sanskrit and the dating of the artifact and the fact that there was also records there that showed apparently space stations and UFOs and all this kind of stuff, and the Russians were able to build flying craft from this, shows that there was, in fact, technologically advanced civilization, the ruins of which were found by the Russians in Siberia, of which nobody could live on there now. So back then, there was a primordial civilization which apparently was more benevolent than Atlantis, relatively speaking, but they were at war with the Atlanteans. And then, when there was a pole shift, some of them survived, and they migrated in what's called the Great Aryan Migration. And the Aryans migrated to two areas. They migrated to Iran and India, and then from there they carried on into Europe. So it's really funny, actually, in a tragic way, that Hitler thought that the Aryan bloodline was white people with blue eyes. Nothing could be further from the truth. Aryans started out as Iranians and Indians, and there were two offshoots of the original primordial religion, and that was Zoroastrianism and Hinduism. And both of them have a prophecy about the times that we're living in right now, right, very, very specific time-encoded prophecy about what's happening right now. And what it said in Zoroastrianism was that there is an adversary, an enemy, a planetary enemy, and that the enemy will be gradually weakened by the focused efforts of the just, meaning the people that are upstanding heroes that are wanting to see the world be better. And it doesn't happen all at once, but slowly but surely the adversary is ground down to a halt. And in the book, which I finished writing the manuscript in April, I made a bold prophecy, and I'm going to have this in an article that will be up on my website tomorrow, August 20th, the release date for the new book. I show the quote from the book where I say, it seems very likely that between the time that I finish writing this manuscript and before the book actually comes out in August, that we're going to see major movement towards disclosure. And that was before the NSA and all the Edward Snowden stuff and the Glenn Greenwald and all that stuff. So I believe that what's happening now is that there is an international alliance that is working very focused to bring down this nemesis, and they are, in fact, whether they know it or not, fulfilling this prophecy that goes all the way back to the time of Atlantis, 12,500 years ago.
Let's talk a little bit more about that prophecy, David, and then spend the final hour here taking phone calls with you right here on Coast to Coast AM. And this is the interactive portion of the show. We're going to take your phone calls in a moment with David Wilcock right here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back, David Wilcock with us. We'll take your calls. David, let's get into this international alliance you were talking about. Who are these players?
Well, George, I was trying to get it done before we went on the air tonight, August 19th. It should be able to be published tomorrow, August 20th. A huge article that I'm writing right now where I go back to Sherman Skolnick, who was a journalist on another major radio show, and he wrote a lot of articles, and he mentioned that there are about 600 flag officers in the U.S. military. Those are the people who kind of have the highest degree of rank.
Yes.
Of those 600 flag officers, he was describing as early as like 1998-99 that there was a plan in place to arrest Clinton for treason by trading with the Chinese and things like this. And on a more general basis, they were trying to bring down the overall oil-soaked monopoly press, as he calls it, this oil cartel control of our government. Now, this was 60 flag officers out of 600, so that's 10% of the entire command structure of the U.S. military. And that was before 9/11. Since 9/11, apparently a very significant counterinsurgency has been growing, and it now involves an alliance between the U.S. military, which is apparently a majority. It's at least 60% and possibly over 75% now, including some divisions of the military are now at a 100% support of basically exposing and dismantling the Federal Reserve System. Because it's private bankers, as you've heard so many times, since 1913, the dollar is now worth about 2 cents of what it was in 1913. And that's from massive inflation and just totally stripping out the wealth of the people through the dollar bubble, where they, as I reveal, they stole all the gold in the world through World War I and World War II, where they actually owned both sides of the war. I talk about this extensively in the book, Synchronicity Key. And the wars were deliberately orchestrated events to plunder the central banks of the countries that were invaded and or threaten them into handing over their gold to the Federal Reserve in exchange for bonds. Now, the bonds in some cases have a face value of $1 billion, but the Federal Reserve specifically put mistakes in the bonds so that they would never be able to be redeemed with actual American dollars. Very recently, in this past week, Russia Today, a mainstream media outlet in Russia, has come forward with the story of these bonds, and I wrote a whole book on this in January 2012 and February of last year. And then the Russian media picked it up, and I was starred in 6 hours of documentaries, 3 hours on January 16th and 3 hours on January 30th, on prime time on major network Russian television station called REN TV. And what happened was, on the same day, January 16th, that I came out with that show, Germany asked the Federal Reserve to return their gold that had been taken from them in World War II.
You call that?
That is not a coincidence.
Have you ever heard of a guy named Leo Wanta?
Absolutely.
This is a bizarre story.
Oh, it's true. I mean, look, here in Hollywood, I'm now working with Jim Hart. We're working on a movie called Convergence together. We have two of the biggest actors in Hollywood right now are looking at our script. And Jim just wrote a movie called Epic. It's a cartoon movie that's out right now. You can rent it. It's got like Beyonce and Steve Tyler and people like that actually doing the voices in the thing. It's a great movie. But before I ever met him, I was in the process of trying to find money for my film. And I met this guy who actually handed me a card, and I can't say what the card said on it, but it was obviously connected to this whole Bilderberg and Illuminati cartel. I was shocked when he showed me the card. I was shocked by the red snakeskin leather briefcase and by this weird symbol that he had on his neck, on a necklace. And he told me, I asked him, who are the people that have the money that you're going to be giving me? Are they people like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Warburgs and the Astor Bundy Collins, da-da-da-da? He said, yes. How did you know that? And I said, well, just call it an educated guess. And I winked. And then I said to him, so do you know Leo Wanta? And he said, yes. I said, well, can you tell me anything about him? He said, well, Leo used to work for us, but we had a falling out.
It's a bizarre story. They call him the $27.5 trillion man.
Yeah.
That he almost single-handedly destroyed the Soviet Union, brought them down.
That is true. And that's one of the things that Sherman Skolnick, who I was just mentioning, wrote about extensively.
The late Sherman Skolnick.
The late Sherman Skolnick, right. That when you print money that's counterfeit and you introduce it into an economy, it will bring down a country better and faster than bombs.
Was he an ambassador?
Leo Wanta?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah, actually.
So he's alive. He's out there somewhere.
Oh, yeah, he's out there. And, he's one of the people who are involved in this global situation in which, when you really get down to the core of it, many of these countries, apparently the Asian countries, 85% of the gold that the Federal Reserve is holding originally came from Asia. And there's a big, big debate now about a shift in geopolitical order that is not going to allow Asia to dominate the whole planet. So there are still business agreements being worked out in which Asia does not become the dominant power in the world just because they had more gold than everybody else did. But we are very likely going to be seeing some extremely significant political events. And by extremely significant, I mean unlike anything you could have imagined. And I think it's going to be so big that it will actually lead to an overwhelming public exposure of all the kind of stuff that your guests have been talking about on Coast for so many years. I think everybody is going to know that the world has been run by a secretive cult that is actually worshiping Lucifer and doing very nasty rituals in many cases. I think the world is going to know that these people systematically invaded 7 branches of our society, including education, science, government, media, military, and that they had a very orchestrated agenda going back to at least 1776, the founding of the Bavarian Illuminati with Adam Weishaupt, and that their objective was nothing less than total world domination and control.
That's an amazing story. Let's take some calls here, David. They're all lining up for you.
Okay, great.
We'll go to Lima, Ohio. Jessica's with us. Hey, Jessica. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask if there's a way that I can tell, or maybe you can tell me, who I was before and what the heck am I doing here this time?
Well, David, you're not a hypnotherapist.
In order to do I did used to do client readings from 98 to 2005. I processed 500 clients. it does require that I do about a 7-minute hypnotic induction on myself, and I wouldn't want to do it on the air because it's really sort of a personal thing with the client. But I did have excellent success. In general terms, that is a very poignant question because who you are before or who you were before does have bearing on who you are now. But there is, thankfully, a nice cheat code in the universe, which is that whatever you really need to know, whatever was your biggest stumbling blocks in other lifetimes, will happen again. If you go back to my original video, the 2012 Enigma, which was the #1 most viewed video on all of Google on December 1st, 2008, that's how I ended up meeting Jim Hart, the guy that wrote Contact in the first place.
Right.
Because I mentioned Contact in the story, and I mentioned The Last Mimsy, which he also wrote, and he was blown away that I didn't realize that he'd written both of those movies. But anyway, in that 2012 Enigma video, if you go to the beginning, you see all these photo comparisons of myself as Edgar Casey and then all these other people that were the closest associates of Edgar Casey who were the closest associates with me. And I've now found about 4 more of those, and I've kept it very secret. I'm not revealing who these people are because I don't want them to be harassed. But it's astonishing that reincarnation, when you actually figure out who you were, there's a startlingly accurate face match. There's character matches. And the weirdest thing is, in the cycles of history, that in the case of, there's certain specific historical personas I identified. That includes Hitler. It includes Jimmy Carter. It includes Richard Nixon, where we have the same people doing the same things at the same point in both cycles, and they look the same.
Isn't that amazing?
It really is amazing.
And I'm talking to the guy who's the reincarnated Edgar Casey.
Well, I mean, there's pretty good evidence that I was. You know, same abilities, same look.
Do you think you are?
Same astrology. I think that insofar as people are capable of believing in reincarnation, this is as good of a case as any I've seen. And it's very strange that I've been able to identify, it's probably 9 or 10 people now that were Casey's closest associates who magically reappeared in my life. Some of the ones that reappeared took a long time to figure out, but then once I saw it, it was like, oh my God, how did I miss this for so long? Because here's the deal, and this is the answer to Jessica's question, really. The people who are in your life, especially now that we're at the end of this 25,000-year cycle where it all comes to a head, the people who are in your life are the same people that you've had before. Almost guaranteed. The people who are your family members, the people who might be close to you at work, the people who you've been in romantic relationships with, almost always are people you've had in other lifetimes in your life very poignantly.
Yeah, I agree.
And you can get a hypnotic regression. I encourage people to look for the ways to get those, and you will see in many cases in a regression who these people were in other lifetimes and who you were. So it is possible to get that information. You do have to work for it, but it is possible to get that information.
Let's go to the United Kingdom. Dan's with us via Skype. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hello, George. Hello, David. Just before I ask my question, I totally concur with what you just said, David. It's true, I've recognized many people in this lifetime, and I have quite a memory regarding past lifetimes. But the reason I called up is because I'm a little bit out of my depth with some experience I've been having with regards instantaneous synchronicity that I wanted to share with you, and hopefully you might be able to shed some light on them.
Sure.
For about over 10 years now, I've been practicing my own type of meditation, which is based on kind of pure intuition. And I've had over 100 experiences now, and I'm no joke, where every time I enter an altered state through my meditation, my environment synchronizes around me, and it includes anything outside in my environment. It includes even creaks in the building, and it includes, and this is the bizarre part, media and even recorded media. And it's happened so many times now, David, that I have to accept it as part of reality, as a truth. And I'm a bit blown away about it, obviously, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't know where to take it. I know it's happening. I know it's kind of like it's supernatural to some extent, but I'm kind of out of my depths, and I really don't know.
Well, I've had similar things. you remember the song Celebration by Kool and the Gang?
Of course we do.
Where it goes, dit, 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 right? There's that horn hit. I actually was listening to that song and emotionally involved. It was a song similar to Celebration, but I'm using it as a simpler example that people are familiar with. But the point is, I was listening to a song like that. It was a Phil Collins song that had a horn section in it, and it had a similar type of horn hit. And right as the horn hit came in the song, and I was looking forward to hearing it, somebody driving the other way in their car honked their horn exactly the same way at exactly the same moment. And like Dan just said, I've had many, many of these experiences where the actual environment around you talks to you, and it actually is synchronized with your thoughts. Now, that does, in the conventional mindset, and by conventional I mean cabal manipulated, because there is a cabal out there and they don't want you to awaken. They need you to be ignorant, and they want the knuckle-dragging, drooling troglodytes. They do not want intelligent thinking people, because intelligent thinking people will not subject themselves to tyranny for very long. When you start to have these synchronicities happen, it reveals that the universe is a lot more magical than you think, and that you've been taught to believe. And instead of looking at yourself with judgment and saying that you're crazy, and Dan, I can tell you're not thinking you're crazy. You've said this is happening over and over again. But here's the deal. Your resistance wears down, and instead of continually saying, boy, I wonder if that was a synchronicity, you start saying, okay, that was. What does it mean for me? And there never really was a book before that talks you through this in the detail and the wonderment that my book does. I'm really happy to have been able to accomplish this. It's phenomenal that I pulled it off and that it came out so well.
How long did this book take you?
Really, the core of the development was 3.5 years. I started writing this book in 2010 very intensely after spending probably about the previous 3 years putting the information together in my notes. I started the actual production in 2010, spent most of the year 2010 writing this book, but then realized that I wasn't smart enough to actually write about the cycles of history yet. I boiled it down to about 120 pages, but all those pages ended up being cut when I wrote Source Field Investigations because we had to get it down to 500 pages and something had to go. And then I ended up deferring writing it, and I didn't really pick it up again until the end of 2012 after the Mayan calendar end date came and went. And I said, okay, if we're not getting some magic cosmic ascension at the end of 2012, what else do we know about all this information? Because there's obviously something here. The investigation is so comprehensive and so vast, there's got to be something here. So what else do we know? And I said, let's go back and look at the actual cycle that ended in 2012. Let's go back and look at the fact that all these researchers have found out that time is repeating in subdivisions of that cycle. And that's when I really went back and said, okay, let's look at 9/11, let's look at the prophecies, and let's look at how these prophecies are going to come true. And I prognosticated in the book that we were going to see disclosure starting very soon. And in fact, it already is with the NSA stuff. And as I've been predicting, it's going to get a lot more intense, and it's building up to some very significant geopolitical events that will be amazing. I mean, they might be scary when they first happen, but I don't think that's going to last very long.
No, probably not. Not probably. Hey, let me ask you a quick question before the break.
Yeah.
Your take on what's going on in Egypt, but I want it from your philosophy.
I actually think that Egypt, to some degree, may be sort of like a cosmic blueprint of what this whole transitional stage will be like.
Mm-hmm.
Revolutions are nasty. They're not always pretty. And I mean, we're talking about the most entrenched organized crime cartel in the history of Earth. We're talking about a group that has systematically compromised the organs of military, politics, finance, media, education, and science. How the hell do you bring them down? It's not easy. It requires widespread awareness so that when the final events are taken and the actions that need to be done are taken by the people who need to take them, that the public will actually support it and not think of it as some horrible Illuminati takeover of the government. But it seems, and I'm not judging this, I'm not trying to say that there should be a revolution. What I'm telling you is that other people are apparently planning something like this, and this is an international alliance most of the world outside of the white European countries that are the oligarchs running the show here for the cabal, you got basically all of South America, all of Africa, except for maybe one or two holdouts, pretty much all of Southeast Asia, China, Russia. It's just about everybody except for a handful of Western European countries and the U.S.
We're coming back with final questions with the man, David Wilcock, on Coast to Coast AM. Well, it's been a while since I've talked with Lori Toy, and she will be our guest on our next Coast to Coast program. And she, of course, is bringing us some fascinating information about Ascended Masters. That'll be our next Coast to Coast show. David, so if history repeats itself, what could be the next major event here?
Well, George, just in the last 2 or 3 days, we've had a soldier that comes forward and says that the British military apparently assassinated Princess Diana. That's huge.
Huge story. Strange story.
We have the U.S. military drugging its own soldiers. We have the government officially admitting that Area 51 is real.
They just admitted through CIA old documents that they were the ones involved in the upheaval of Mohammed Mossadegh
in
Iran.
1953.
Yep.
There's an attack piece that just came out against JFK that's making LBJ sound like the good guy, and that LBJ did all the things that Kennedy was only paying lip service to. All this stuff, to me, is part of a grander, organized effort by this alliance, and a lot of it is computer hackers in the U.S. military. The anonymous group apparently has a lot of U.S. military operatives in it. I think Snowden is only one example. It recently came out that he was planning on this all the way back when he worked for Dell, and the NSA apparently was Dell's client. So I think this is all part of an orchestrated effort. We've seen very big lawsuits against major banks. We're seeing the huge LIBOR scandal that came out last year that nobody knows what the heck to do with, because it's now public knowledge that all of the financial system is being rigged by the biggest banks. We had the very groundbreaking Glatfelder scientific study that came out in 2011, where they showed that a small group of only about 147 corporations are literally controlling about 80% of all the wealth in the world. And of those 147, the top 50, about three-quarters of them are financial institutions, and you go to the top of the list, and they're all the Federal Reserve Bank companies.
Sure, of course.
So the whole thing has been exposed, and I'm hoping that this group will step down without bloodshed, because it could be ugly. And when I say ugly, I mean we could see the airports shut down in America for a while. We might even see communications shut down for a while. We may see federal marshals that are making arrests. They may be helped by UN troops to do this, because this is an international alliance. So things could get pretty wild, and people might be really freaked out. It could be traumatic at first. But I think that in order for it to succeed, they first have to establish such a strong criteria where the public realizes this has to be done, that it will actually be able to be supported. Because, frankly, I don't know about you, George, but I'm ready to see dollars printed by the U.S. Treasury, backed by our own collateral of the wealth of resources that we have in this nation.
That's a great idea.
Yes, and not have to be beholden to foreign bankers that we're paying astronomical interest for, and they're propping up their own banks by writing $26 trillion of bailouts. That's the real number. I mean, the $1 trillion bailout thing, the TARP, was nothing. When Senator Alan Grayson and Ron Paul and a couple others audited the Federal Reserve, forced them to release the books, it came out to between $26 and $29 trillion of American money that they just printed. Now, that number is hard to wrap your head around, because the whole amount of money that is made on Earth in a given year is only a little over $60 trillion. So that's about half the money that everybody made on Earth for 1 year that they printed and gave to themselves of American money. And that is absolute treason against the people. It's treason against the planet. And, George, a really big part of this is, what are they hiding about who's out there and who's who in the zoo? Are we alone in the universe? Well, they knew the answer at least back in the Roswell crash, and I've had insiders tell me that ETs have been in contact with American presidents going back for a century. There's been open contact with every American president and human extraterrestrials that materialize in his office throughout the entire 20th century.
Let's take some final calls here for you.
Sure.
We've got Jeff in Cleveland. Welcome to the show. Hi, Jeff.
Good morning, George and David. I'm surprised, George, that you didn't play anything off the Police's Synchronicity album.
Oh, he did?
Actually.
Yeah, we did. You missed it.
Yeah, right at the beginning he did. It was great.
Oh, that was off that. I didn't know that was off that album. So, okay, never mind.
Okay.
I got a couple of really fast quickies before I talk about my Synchronicity issue. First of all, I want every listener out there to think very heavily about stopping these wildfires. Because if there's any truth to the 100th monkey theorem, concentration by massive amounts of people can make things happen.
How about rain there, too?
Well, yeah, that too. Well, in Idaho, they're talking about that they're supposed to be getting some rain, so that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
Second, I have real quick, because you're coming to Cleveland, you're actually coming to Lakeland College in Kirtland. Kirtland, as the story goes, is the original location for Joseph Smith's church. And he got kicked out of there because the citizens believed that what he was doing was running a cult. And then, of course, he went out to Salt Lake City and founded the...
And the rest is history.
Saints. So I thought you might be interested in hearing that.
Okay, thank you.
Now, as far as the Synchronicity is concerned, I've been dogged by this for at least 25 years in various forms. But the one that has hit me the most often, and it's happened on more than a handful of occasions, is I'll suddenly get a wild hair that I'll decide to listen to some music that I haven't listened to in ages.
Right.
And then something happens tragically to somebody in the band. Either they get injured severely or they die or something like that. And this has happened, like I said, on more than a handful of occasions. And anytime I get that hair and I decide that I want to listen to something that I haven't listened to in 10 or 15 years, it always makes me nervous that there's going to be something I hear shortly thereafter.
Well,
so
check this out. In the book, I actually am describing how Roman history reiterates itself as American history very precisely. And I also talk about how there's a story behind how these events take place that's called the hero's journey. It's a pattern of events that every Hollywood screenplay and every ancient myth uses. And I had to learn that to write movies for Hollywood, which is the movie I'm working on called Convergence. So I talk about the Beatles, and I mention how very shortly after the Kennedy assassination, the Beatles all of a sudden become extremely popular from an appearance on Ed Sullivan. And then the Beatles sort of turned against their creators by creating all these songs that promoted peace and a positive revolution. All You Need Is Love, Imagine, by John Lennon, all these kind of songs were amazing. And I speculate in the book that they may actually be duplicating stuff that the same guys did back in Roman history, and perhaps if we get enough accurate historical knowledge, then we would know that. So it's possible that these people in another cycle of time were musicians before, and they're repeating the same thing, and you may be sensing when their cycle comes up based on this fact that time is actually not linear, it's cyclical, and the same things keep happening. Just a thought out there.
Okay, next up we go to Ray in Birmingham, Alabama. Ray, go ahead. You're on with David Wilcock.
Hey, George, great show tonight.
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
I had a question about karma. I've had some bad things happen since the 17th. I lost a tip on my little finger. I broke 2 fingers. I was having to do a workman's comp thing where I was in a light-duty job and wound up losing the job today. And I've tried to be great and kind to everybody. I've never done anything. I'm trying to figure out, is this something from a past life, or is it just something that's going on where I can see something? Because I basically, to be honest with you, if I hadn't had all this accident to begin with, I'd never be listening to George at night. So I think, I mean, really, that's the only reason.
He's keeping you up all night, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I can't sleep, so I want to hear something interesting. And the fact that I lost my job, the reason was just like some he said, she said crap. It was really nothing that I really did. And the only reason the girl gave that one of the things she said she hated the conversation topic that I had at work, and my conversation topic was what I heard on George the other night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was so weird. And the thing about synchronicity, all my life I've kind of experienced that where you could be sitting there and watching TV, and all of a sudden you say something, and the next thing out of your mouth, the TV might answer the question. You had to ask a question, all of a sudden you might hear the answer coming off a TV or something. Right. And
you raise a really good point, and I want to make sure that this gets said before we run out of time, because I'm looking at the clock on, yikes, we're almost out of time. But let me say this, it's very significant. Karma is not judgment. When you get, let's say, you said that you broke your finger and that you cut the tip off your little finger, and I really am sorry that happened to you. Ouch. I'm sure it's a horribly painful thing. I had my big toe on my right side shattered on December 21st, the night of the Mayan calendar end date, actually. And I'm still not entirely over it.
That's pain,
David. It's a long time. Yep. And what I can say, though, is that, and I do talk about karma in the book, and I do talk about the underlying benevolent nature of karma. It is not meant to punish you. Nobody's up there snickering and laughing at you and judging you. It's meant to restore you to balance. And I had a case when I got horrible poison ivy, and it got infested in the worst place that poison ivy could happen for a man. Let's just say that. George, you probably know what I'm talking about.
No, I've never had it there, David.
Well, if you cut the weeds down and then you try to take a pee, that's about how it happens. But anyway, it was horrible. It was so bad. And next thing you know, I am thinking, okay, what the heck did I do that caused this to happen? And the only thing I could come up with is that there was only one person in my life who I wasn't being kind to and I wasn't being loving towards, and that was myself. And so, believe it or not, you can actually get karma by not standing up for yourself and not protecting yourself and not being honorable to yourself.
Maybe you just should have worn long pants.
Maybe so. Who knows?
That would have done it. All right, let's go to Scott in Duarte, California. Hey, Scotty, go ahead.
Hey, yeah. This is a great topic. My question was, well, one of the things is my family had inherited a trust from a great aunt quite a few years back,
mm-hmm.
and it involved over 1,000 gold mine claims in Colorado, up in the Rockies, and one of the mines was called the Glory Hole, and the estimate from the USGS was a minimum of $5 billion.
Wow!
And as high as they thought it was as high as $14 billion.
Did you ever reclaim that?
Oh, it's still
litigation.
Yeah.
It's been insane.
A lot of those kind of gold claims have been suppressed because they do not want anything to compete with the fiat money of the U.S. dollar backed by nothing.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of these gold things offered to me, too, spectacular amounts of gold, and I didn't invest in any of them because I saw it as a setup that would have framed me as a public figure, so I did not go for it. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and, well, it turns out that, well, the people who were taking it from us were a couple of crooked judges out of Texas down there on the border of Mexico, and they sued our, at that time, trustee over personal dealings between him and them. Had nothing to do with our trust, and it was over a $50,000 deal that they had. Anyways, they got through the Sister State Act. They were able to somehow take control
crooks everywhere, Scotty,
of our trust. And my
I'm
question.
Really sorry to hear that, man. I've
let's
been
get
through something similar to this, and it's horrible.
Let's get the question in before the clock.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
And I got this phone call from a mysterious guy saying because it ran in the LA Times and a lot of other newspapers around the country a mysterious phone call from a guy saying, I can't tell you who I am, but Scott, it goes a lot higher than these judges. And
well, I think that echoes what you're saying, David.
Yes. What Scott is describing, he is, everybody kind of gets little bits and pieces in their own life of how the cabal has influenced our society, whether it's the UFO cover-up or whether it's financial tyranny. Each of us have a story to tell. Each of us has a piece of the puzzle. And part of the puzzle is the suppression of gold in the interest of creating money backed by nothing but hot air. Everybody got hit by the 2008 financial crisis. Money, investments basically lost about 50% of their value. And I do think things are going to turn around. I mean, everybody probably has heartbreaking financial stories right now. It seems to be prevalent. But I do think that as we go through this change that is actually mandated by the cycles of time themselves, all the way back to this, as I said, galactic blueprint from an intelligent living cosmos, the ancients knew not only what was going to happen, but exactly when it was going to happen, and that does go all the way back to Atlantis, as I said, the Zoroastrians and the Hindus. They wrote out exactly what was going to happen and when. And so people on Earth are taking actions that appear to be completely the product of their own free will, and what they're actually doing, and this includes the patriots in the U.S. military and Russia and this international alliance, they are fulfilling a cosmic blueprint that is older than time itself. It's older than the Earth's entire existence, and it's meant to steer us into a beautiful golden age where we will have Stargate travel and UFO spacecraft, and we'll have anti-gravity, and we'll have time travel, and we'll have an ascension, actually, that takes place where the human being is able to merge with light and become a light body rather than a biological life form. Many of these ancient myths describe that that's where this is going, and that's the peak of it. And I'm just really happy to do my part to put these pieces together. It was totally amazing as I saw it all come together over the course of this year as I wrote the book. And I'm very excited, George, that you brought me on the show to talk to people about this because, I don't even feel worthy of this information. I feel like I'm just standing humbly before a great mystery, and I've solved this puzzle that I didn't even think could be solved, honestly. I was terrified to try to write this book before, but I found a way to make it accessible and fun, and it's not overly complicated, and it spells it out very clearly what's going on, why it's happening, and what does it mean for us, not only on a collective level, but the personal journey of ascension, the personal choices that we make each day of how we're going to live a more ethical and moral life, and how that in turn affects our cosmic evolution, because the payoff for being a good person is so much bigger than people realize that it's mind-blowing, because literally, if you're ready, I believe you will be able to ascend to the next level of human evolution. And I know, George, when I appeared with you on your show, Beyond Belief, we did a whole show just on the rainbow body and this transformative process.
And it's out there. David, good luck with this work, The Synchronicity Key. For Dan Galante, Gina Salvati, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Borles, George Knapp, John B. Wells, and Art Bell, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. I'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.